Hi there. It's been a long time since I've seen your face, so I thought you might like to see mine. I've had a number of questions about the expectations for the final individual assignment, so I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time to just walk you through what the expectations are. So the topic for the assignment is on your screen. This is the most significant single piece of work that you will be doing. And basically you are asked to reflect on the ways that you might use strategically design thinking in your business. So the question specifically is, what is the strategic value and what are the potential limitations of applying design thinking within your organization? Now, it's pretty important to think about the words of this. In particular, think about strategic value. So it's not asking you to produce one-off outcomes, but for you to think about the way you could use some of the tools and approaches that we discussed and the theory that we discussed when we were together during the intensive strategically over the longer term for your business. It's also asking you to consider what the potential limitations of design thinking might be. So we're not asking you to provide a list of all of the reasons why design thinking is great. That would be too easy. What we want you to do is think really deeply about how and why you might integrate some of the learning from the intensive into your business, and what would be the limitations of that learning or of those processes, whether limitations overall because because of the nature of your business or the context in which it's being delivered in, or also perhaps you need to think about the limitations or difficulties of actually introducing these concepts in your environment. So, a bit of a warning to start off with. If you are not currently affiliated with a particular organization, or if you do not consider it appropriate to analyze your own organization in the way that I'm asking you to, you are absolutely free to use your most recent previous organization or some other organization that you know well. However, if you're going to do that, I would strongly recommend that you have a chat with me before you do that, because we want to make sure that you can go deep. It is really important in this task that you have access to information about how your company is organized now and how it solves problems. So you can compare and contrast the design thinking approaches to problem solving that we have discussed during the intensive with what it is that your company is doing now. Now, if your company is already using design thinking, that still provides a challenge for you, because you'll need to go deep and consider whether it's working, what the benefits are, where there are issues. If it's not already using design thinking, or it's not, or similar sort of ideas, then the challenge is absolutely there. You need to address whether or not design thinking could even help your business in some way. And I'm sure all of you have thought of ways that you might use design thinking, even if it is just within your individual management teams. But if you want to look at it for the whole of the company, you need to go deep and think about ways in which design thinking might move your business forward, and how you might implement a design thinking strategically within your organization. To write the assignment, I am going to suggest that you start by looking at the assessment criteria. You can find the assessment criteria by going into Canvas, going to the assignment page and clicking on the little menu, the three dots at the side, and looking at View Rubric. You'll see that there are each of these topics. Sorry, I'm having fancy new pointer and I'm still getting used to it. Each of these areas are assessed. The percentage that I have on this slide shows what overall percentage each of these areas bears to your overall mark. So I will give you a percentage mark out of, well, I will apply it. So out of 20 to analysis and evaluation, and out of 10, sorry, move it over here, and out of 10 for the way that you write, for example. So if you provide a pass in your analysis and evaluation section, you will get 10 or 11 out of 20 for that section. If your writing is absolutely stunning, you are likely to get 9 out of 10 for that section, and so on and so on and so on. And that is how your mark will be assessed and added up. So very first thing you should do, and the very last thing you should do when you're proofing, is go and have a look at those assessment criteria, and you'll see under each column a brief description of what a fail, pass, credit distinction and high distinction in each of those categories will look like. Now, I want all of you shooting for the high distinction category. Of course, not all of you are going to get there. I want you to try for them though. The thing with high distinctions and distinctions is, in addition to meeting those criteria, you need to stand out from the rest of the crowd. And clearly not all of the crowd can stand out from the rest of the crowd. We're not in a Monty Python sketch here. But at the same time, all of you are unique. All of you have amazing value to bring. I'm so excited about what this class can achieve. So I really, really want you to push for it and make sure that you're trying for that highest criteria with a view to doing very well overall. So what am I looking for? The key elements of writing a research paper, and this is advice I give generally in relation to research paper, require firstly knowing your audience, who you're writing for. In this case, an academic audience, being able to define the question, so really nail in to what this question means in the context of your organisation and your experience, being able to identify a hypothesis or a brief answer and expand from that by deeply analysing facts and frameworks, and then ensuring that you have proper citations in order to formulate conclusions. So this requires you to be clear and concise. Yes, you have a lot of words to write, but you don't need to write them all. Think about using headings. Think about making your writing as clear as possible. As I often advise students, make the word count by making every word count. Set out your material logically. Make it easy for your reader to find what it is that they're looking for, the answer to the question. How strategically might design thinking assist your organisation? Next, make sure that you use appropriate terminology. Here, I'm looking for you to use the kind of terminology that's used in the academic materials that you have access to, that we used in the class, that's used in the supporting material. So you might talk, for example, about the extent to which the solutions that you might come up with meet the desirability, feasibility, viability test. This is a test that we talked about a number of times during the course. You might talk about the tools. Use the names for the tools that are generally used either in your textbook or that we used in class or used by Stanford or others. And make sure that you cite the sources for those names. Citing sources is a really important part of the process. It adds credibility to your work if you can demonstrate that you either agree with a peer-reviewed author, or sometimes even better, when you disagree with a peer-reviewed author, when you can juxtapose different writing or different approaches and explain your reasons. Make sure your work is original. One of the great benefits of working with executive MBA students is all of you have such deep experience. All of you have such deep understandings of your own business. I'm interested in what you think and why you think it, and you will, if you come up with your own and you share your own ideas, be able to meet that originality requirement. You need to incorporate clear and articulate analysis. As I said, I want to know what you think, but I also want to know why you think it. I want to see you're working. I want to understand why you think design thinking would be helpful, how you could imagine it working, or why you don't see it ever working in your environment, and what you think the barriers are and why you wouldn't be able to move them. So I need you, in order to achieve this, to think deeply. And out of that deep analysis, you're going to come up with some clear conclusions and recommendations, and those conclusions are going to follow from the arguments that you addressed. I don't want to see anything new in a conclusion. I also don't want to see anything in the lead up to a conclusion that's not necessary to get you to the conclusion. That all goes to this criteria of being clear and concise and ensuring that you are original. Ultimately, too, you need to be objective. I don't care how much you love or how much you hate design thinking. I hope, like me, you love it. But at the end of the day, even if you absolutely despise it, that is not, that's fine, because you will have thought deeply in order to get to that end result. But I do not want your emotional reaction to cloud your point of view. You need to be thinking about the what wows. You need to be thinking about what assumptions underlie the statements that you make and how you can test those at all times. Before we move on, because I do want to talk a little bit about the structure of your work, I want to remind you that even though I'm going to recommend a structure, there is no one-size-fits-all answer here. What's right for you might not be right for somebody else, and vice versa. Ultimately, what's important here is the substance of your work. If you can't make your answer fit neatly into the form that I'm going to recommend, then make sure that you give me the substantive, valuable work rather than slavishly try and stick with the form. Having said that, only use a different form if you've got a substantive reason to do so, particularly if you are not well practiced in writing, particularly in English. Every paper is going to be unique, and there's going to be a lot of different unique problems to fall in love with. I can't wait to read them, to be perfectly frank. So a typical structure is going to look like this. You're going to start with your cover sheet. RMIT Vietnam requires an RMIT cover sheet, so that's just filling in a form, easy peasy. The first page, you might want to put a picture there, you might want to think about the layout of it if you have time to do that. If you're going to add pictures or diagrams in addition to your general details, make sure that they add value. A picture says 1,000 words, and a completely irrelevant picture will tell me that you're not really paying attention. You should incorporate an executive summary at the beginning. The job of the executive summary is to summarize the outcomes. Generally, this is something that you will write together with the introduction at the very end. It should summarize your overall report, and it should signpost to me where it is that I'm going to find the meat, the most valuable stuff. Executive summaries are not, as many people tend to think, a get-out-of-jail-free area for references. If you are drawing on the work of a third party in any way, you need to reference it, even in the executive summary. If your paper goes for more than 5 pages, it's a good idea to have a table of contents. One of the reasons for that is, and you can build it using Microsoft Word or Google Docs, whatever software you use these days will let you generate a table of contents using the headings. And the headings provide a really good outline. They help your reader find what it is that they're looking for. And sometimes I'll start reading and think, oh, why aren't you talking about blah, blah, blah? And a quick flick back to the table of contents will show me that you're going to talk about blah, blah, blah at a later time. So continuing on with the typical structure, right at the beginning, you'll have an introduction. My strong recommendation to you is to write the introduction last. So I'm going to come back to it in a little while. The key thing to think about with the introduction, though, is make it as interesting as you can. Make it suggest that there is value in reading along. Entice your reader to continue on. You might incorporate it in the introduction, but it's really important, I think, to set out an aim for your paper. And a good idea sometimes is to just write the aim on one of these post-it notes and stick it above your computer while you're writing. And as you work through, continually look at that aim and ask yourself, do these words help me achieve that aim? In this case, your aim is to reflect on the whole of the course and identify how it might be applied in your individual context. So how you might strategically deploy design thinking and what the limitations of deploying design thinking might be in your organization. Oh, and I've got table of contents there again. Not sure why I've repeated that. Sorry about that. Typical structure. The middle part of your essay is going to deal with a range of factors and issues that are precise and relevant to your context. So start by giving me enough detail about the context of your business for me to understand why I should fall in love with the wicked problem that you can see design thinking helping you with, or why you're going to convince me that your context is not a context that's suitable for design thinking. So you need to sort of ask yourself these questions. How DT or design thinking might apply, whether that's already because your company is already doing it or at some time in the future in the context of your business. I want you to really focus on what the strategic value is, long-term value as part of the strategy, the mission, the vision for your company. You do need to think about the limitations. Oh, sorry about that. I'll go back. You do need to think about the limitations. Now, they could be limitations for introducing design thinking, potential pushback, cultural change, those kind of things. Or it might just be that you are of the view that design thinking isn't going to work in your context. Now, that will require some significant thought and depth in order to successfully argue that, but I do need you to think that through deeply. And you need to incorporate reflective practice. So think about what reflective practice is. This is not a separate section, but just think about the reflective practice. So as you think back on the course, I want you to think about some key insights that you had that might be relevant to your business. And when writing about those, you need to interpret the meaning in the context of your business. Evaluate the value of that insight for your business, and then tweak that into a plan for the future. What will you do differently? How might you use a particular tool or a particular approach in your business in a different way? Perhaps you've already done that since the intensive. You've made some changes in the way that you operate within your business. If you have, that's perfect, because you're able then to describe those, interpret what happened, evaluate whether or not it worked or it didn't work, and then talk about your plans for either continuing to do that or how you will adjust and how you will pivot, how you will iterate moving forward. A really important tool as you go through this practice is this desirability, feasibility, viability tool. If we're going to talk about what the strategic value to an organization is, we do need to think about the extent to which design thinking can help us find this trifecta. The things that, or changes or products that are desirable, that are also feasible, that the organization can in fact do, and also are viable, that can be done in a profitable way, a sustainable way, and an ethical way. And remember that ethical practice is one of the requirements for consideration in this particular paper. As you draw towards the end, you need to have a conclusion, a clear conclusion. So your conclusion, I've mentioned this before, mustn't introduce anything new. It needs to follow from the body of your analysis. So I want you to continually be thinking, if you want to put something in conclusion, do you have something in the analysis that supports it? And conversely, if there's something in the analysis that doesn't go anywhere, perhaps you can cut it, or perhaps you need to go deeper. So check then for consistency with your introduction as well. And it might be that you're writing the introduction immediately after you write the conclusion, even though it appears earlier in the paper. Good papers will include a set of recommendations or some kind of plan as to what happens next. What are you going to do differently as a consequence of this course? And of course, last but by no means least, you need to incorporate a reference list, and you need to check when you're proofreading that you've used the RMIT Harvard in-text citation format, and that all of your citations are, all of your references are properly cited. So I said I'd mention the introduction again, and I think it's important to think about an introduction, even though you're writing it last. It really is a very important part of the paper. I think of introductions as having a kind of shape, that they move from the general and pinpoint into the specific. So what they include are contextual background information. The introduction needs to give me, even if it's only in a couple of sentences, enough information so that I know about your business and your role in it and how you see that as being relevant to this particular question. It needs to set out your aim or your objectives, what your research problem is. So in this case, it needs to be clear that you're analysing and reflecting on the use of design thinking in your own organisation. It's going to set out the scope of the research. So it's going to talk about how you're going to answer this problem, what kind of inquiry you're going to make internally, whether or not you've read external papers, what level of inquiry you've made in order to answer this question. It's also good to consider in an introduction why the question is important. Why would you ask this question? So in this case, as particularly those of you who are embarking on your MBA journey, being able to walk out of this course with a toolkit of design thinking, tools, skills, approaches, thought processes will really help you in other subjects, but also provide you with a real practical approach to dealing with problems in your own organisation. So if you can think about that, but then also identify a particular problem that you're going to fall in love with within your own organisation, and think about how you might apply design thinking to it by explaining to us why that is a problem we should fall in love with. When I say us, I mean your reader, which is really just me, to be frank. That gives us a really good understanding of where your essay is going to take us. You might talk about how you're going to find the answers. Are you thinking about running a prototype? Are you thinking about identifying a particular project to apply design thinking to? Have you already started doing that? How are you going to evaluate the benefits of design thinking in your organisation? And then you might also refer to the structure of the rest of the paper, signpost out where it is that we will find the things that matter. I've got a grab bag here of some tips and tricks that people often find useful when they're thinking about writing. So this is going to sound a bit trite, but you do need to start writing early. 100% of people who don't start never finish. You need time to play with this, to think about it and to reflect on it. It is much easier to just bash everything out and then delete the stuff that you don't need later than it is to race at the last minute and try and find something in the shallows. It's a really great idea to get somebody else to read it and to proofread it. Somebody who's not in the course, somebody who can help you with the readability, but also an intelligent reader who's going to question you, because when you get deep, you often actually don't see the wood for the trees. Set aside some regular time to write. Don't try and do it all in one go. Sometimes it's a good idea to just set yourself a little writing challenge. Set an egg timer or your phone or something and just say, I'm going to just get this out. I'm going to spend the next half an hour on it, get as much as you can. Even if it's terrible, it's something rather than nothing. The other way is promise yourself that you'll do something that you don't want to do after you've written for half an hour. So make the writing of this assignment the thing that is your reward, is the great thing to do. It's so much more fun than those things that you don't want to do. Also, when you reach a milestone, when you finish your first draft, I don't know, take yourself out for a beer or have a cup of tea, or Facebook friend somebody, or send me a WhatsApp and have a chat with me. Reward yourself when you reach the milestones. And aim to finish a couple of days early if you can. Leave it alone for a couple of days and then have a really good solid read of it when you're not filling in the gaps. One of the things that I find is really useful to do when I've written something is to get Siri to read it out loud to me, because Siri, with its terrible robot voice, it doesn't fill in the gaps. It reads exactly what you've written down. And so you will often hear grammatical errors or inconsistencies in a way that you don't see them, because we read what we want to read. Don't forget to use the citation guide and the other guides that are in Canvas that will help you get the form right. I am much more interested in the substance than anything else, but if you don't get the form right, I can't give you the really high marks. I mentioned before the idea of signposting. Signposting helps me to find the important elements of your paper. So signpost the structure through your writing. So sometimes you need to forecast, so you need to say something that is going to be dealt with later on. So by just telling me instead that you're going to deal with something in more detail later on, forecast to me means I'm not saying, didn't you think about X, Y, and Z? Sometimes you need to recapitulate. So an example there is when you really need to highlight something that you said earlier in order to make the point. And sometimes you just need to provide an overview. So before the analysis of the results from this instrument, it's important to discuss the theoretical basis, blah, blah, blah. So these are some examples that the text here is probably not particularly useful to you because they actually come from examples of law papers. But I think you can see the point that by using language in your reports that says you're going to deal with something later, or you highlight something that you've said earlier, you save words and you save me trawling around looking for those things. I won't spend too much time talking about this slide, but it's really important to make sure that if you make a statement of fact, you want to make sure that the author, that fact is supported by a citation. And if you make a statement that's based on the opinion of a third party, you need to find a citation or a reference to support that person's opinion. If it's your own opinion, it actually looks even better if you are able to find peer-reviewed sources that support that opinion as well. So for every assertion you make, try and find a reinforcement from a similar point made by another writer. If you refer to something that can be measured or reported, for example, the market size, number of employees, those kind of things, ideally you will find someone who has conducted an academic study in the area to back up your claims. Or in relation to business, for example, an annual report, a website, some sort of basis where I can find or see that support. Sorry about that, suddenly sneezing. Personally, I don't like seeing terms like this author believes or in my opinion. They're unnecessary. If you reference properly, then I will be able to tell what's your opinion and what's somebody else's opinion. You can't be objective if you're not conscious of the opinions and the viewpoints of others. I mentioned earlier on that objectivity is one of the criteria that I'm looking for. Don't ignore other people's points of view. In particular, don't ignore the points of view that are different from your own. Be conscious of objections that haven't been raised yet. You don't need to be paranoid, but particularly when you're talking about the benefits of design thinking, be conscious of ways that other people might not understand or might not agree with you, and seek to offset that criticism as early as you can. Ethical research requires us to show all sides of an argument and to evaluate them fairly. By the way, footnotes don't count towards your word limit. They can be used to reference dissenting opinions, factual reinforcements, etc. Footnotes need to be quite limited in this context because we're using our RMIT, Harvard, but it is a last resort if you need it. Yes, you can include pictures and diagrams, but make sure that they use add value. You need to use the Harvard Guide, but if a source includes a suggested or recommended citation, then I'm happy for you to use that. And your bibliography or your reference list should reference all sources that contribute to the paper, even if you don't quote from them directly. So just to recap, I just wanted to remind you about the hero's journey, because I think the hero's journey discussion that we had, and this is Mark Boy's picture of it, much prettier than the one that I drew on the paper in the room. I think this will help you think about how your organization might embark on a design thinking journey. You'll remember that we started with our ordinary life. So some sort of spark, or we're living our ordinary life, and some sort of spark or call to action happens, which results in us taking that leap of faith. So we can also talk about this as being the what is stage of the of our design thinking journey. At this stage, we've gathered our mentors, but we're really just trying to understand what is in your organization. What is the problem that we're going to fall in love with? So by identifying the current state and what the current issues are, using design thinking tools, we will start to identify gaps and opportunities that might lead to the use of design thinking. So remember the kinds of tools that we talked about in that what is stage. We use visualization over and over again, but journey mapping, value chain analysis, mind mapping, personas, really important. Here we try and stay away from the crystal ball. At the early stage, we don't really want to spend too much time thinking about what might happen in the future yet. We really want to bed in and understand the organization and understand what is right now. And then we make our leap of faith and we dive into the unknown. So this is our scary place. This is where we start our ideation and we start to focus on the what if. So at this stage, we should already be completely in love with our problem and ready to let go of the old ways by coming up with as many new ideas as we can. So the ideation process. So as you're thinking about how might you introduce design thinking concepts into your organization, you can in fact ideate about how you might do that. So what would that look like? Would you pilot it? Would you do it in large teams? Would you pick one problem? Would you have a wholesale change to the whole of the organization? Now, of course, you're also writing an essay. So my guess is you are going to spend a little bit of time in the pit of despair over here. And don't forget, I am at the other end of a WhatsApp call. So seek help, talk about it, let me help if I can. It's at this stage too that I need you to be really focusing on the reflection. So identifying insights, interpreting them, evaluating them, and starting to plan for the future as you create these new powers, these new design thinking sweet spot powers in order to affect change in your organization. I want you to continue to come back to this desirability, viability, feasibility trifecta, as I keep calling it, as we think about what really matters in this organization. And then you'll be able to return with your conclusion. So your conclusion will include identifying the new tools that you're going to use, the gifts that you're going to return with, the new knowledge that you have now to bring into the new version of your ordinary life. Just pulling that back to what the whole of the picture looks like. I think actually if you were to print this slide and stick this behind your computer, you might find that this is just as helpful as a formal structure. So while I was editing, I realised that the camera dropped out halfway or about a third of the way through there. So you didn't get to see my face, but the value is actually in the slides. I'll make the slides available to you. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to go into the discussion boards on Canvas, share your questions with your colleagues, answer other people's questions. That's how you learn. Get onto WhatsApp, have the conversation there, or reach out to me. Let's have those conversations. Can't wait to fall in love with the problems you're falling in love with and see what you've got out of the intensive experience that we had that was design thinking for business. Look after yourselves, hey. Cheers.